Israel has nukes. Can I just remind, we haven't said that in this whole conversation. Israel illegally has nukes.
You keep throwing stuff in that's not
No, but it's relevant to the conversation. It is relevant.
Mehdi Hasan just walked into a room with two hosts, got outnumbered, and then proceeded to fact-check both of them into the ground for nearly 2 hours straight. I've seen a lot of political interviews. A lot. And I can count on one hand the number of times I have watched someone get tag-teamed by two hosts on their own show and come out on the other side having won every single exchange. Not one or two. Every single one. The Israel lobby, the Iran nuclear deal, the Democratic Party, immigration, blowback, all of it. Hasan did not just hold his ground. He advanced on every front while they scrambled to keep up. And here is what makes this one different from every other progressive destroys talking points clip you have seen this week. These hosts were not bad at their jobs. They were not unprepared. They came in sharp. And it still was not enough. Because Hasan did not just bring opinions. He brought the receipts, the exact numbers, the exact timelines, the exact moments where the official story falls apart. And once you have the receipts, nobody can touch you. What you're about to watch is what it looks like when someone who actually did the homework sits down in a room full of people who thought they did. I am Silas Miller. This is Miller's Mandate. And if this kind of analysis is what you have been missing, hit subscribe before we even get into it. Let's go.
China spends huge amounts of money shaping US foreign policy if it can. So does Qatar, so do lots of countries. So I guess the thing that I'm trying to get to the bottom of, because it's such a big talking point in the US right now, is what is the supposed mechanism by which this tiny country of Israel has this outsized power over the president of the United States?
So a couple of things. One is, it's not mutually exclusive, is it, Constantine, to say that Donald Trump has responsibility. He's a grown man. He may not act like a grown man, but is a grown man and has to take responsibility for decisions he makes. That's not mutually exclusive with saying, but the Israelis also tricked him, manipulated him, lobbied him, bullied him, pressured him. Both of those things can be true at the same time.
All I'm asking is, what is the mechanism
so let's come
by
to that.
which
But we
that
accept that both those things can be true.
Of course,
So now we come to what is the Israelis doing. You would accept that, you just listed a bunch of countries, and the Gulf, the Qataris have a lot of influence, the Emiratis have a lot of influence, the Russians, sadly, have a lot of influence with Trump. You would accept that none of those countries come close to Israel's influence. I don't think there's any question mark about Israel's influence on American policies. The question you're asking about is how.
What's the mechanism?
But no one would deny. I mean, you watched the Ted Cruz interview with Tucker Carlson that went viral not long ago. Cruz says, I came into politics to defend Israel. They don't say that about any other country. I've never heard an American senator say, I came into politics to defend Belgium. Never heard it. Never heard anyone talk about any other country the way.
Just to interject one more thing, if I may. That's not necessarily evidence of Israel having influence. It might well be a case of there are lots of people who live in America who believe, for whatever reason, for religious reasons or for geopolitical reasons, that this is a country with which America should have a close alliance.
So 100% I agree with you. There are Christian evangelicals in this country who believe that the rapture will happen when all the Jews are gathered in this place, and they are even more hardcore pro-Israel than a lot of pro-Israeli Jews. That's 100% true. But there are also a bunch of people in American politics. I know, I've met them, I've interviewed them. They tell me this on and off the record, who are supporting Israel because they're worried about being primaried. They're worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about being called anti-Semitic. They're worried about being targeted by AIPAC. They're worried about being targeted by their political opponents, et cetera, et cetera. The idea that there isn't a very, very powerful pro-Israel lobby is absurd. Just as there is a very powerful gun lobby, just as there's a very powerful farmer lobby, right? It's funny that when we in this city, people are happy to say, you're owned by the gun lobby. But for good reasons, because of anti-Semitic tropes, people don't want to say you're owned by the Israel lobby.
There's a good reason.
There is a good reason
for it. Of course.
But the fact is,
let me just
there is an Israel lobby that has massive oversized influence on American politics.
The distinction I'm trying to make, and I think it's an important one, and it's good that we're exploring this, which is, I think the reason people worry about calling it the Israeli lobby versus the gun lobby is the Israeli lobby implies some kind of foreign influence, right? Whereas the point that I think you and I are both making, actually, and in agreement on, is there are lots and lots of Americans who, for whatever reasons, their own personal reasons, view this as an important strategic alliance of the United States or a religious worldview or whatever. So, and I think that's where the distinction becomes difficult.
I think you're, in good faith, overstating the other part of the argument, maybe for argument's sake or devil's advocacy. All I'm saying is, let me give you one example. When you ask Democratic voters, do you support what Israel's doing in Gaza? 8%, according to one poll, said we support it. The
Democrats don't support it. Okay.
Vast majority don't support it. When you go look at Democrats in Congress, the vast majority do support it. There's an absolute disconnect. The numbers are reversed.
And why is that?
That's exactly my point. Why is that? It's not because they're all out for self-interest. It's because they're lobbied by various lobbies, the military-industrial complex, which also has interest in war, the pro-Israel lobby, vast influence that there's money in politics that influence a lot of positions in this country. You're in this town. This whole town is very corrupt. Right? The way you influence people is through money, and the same thing with Israel.
Actually, the thing that they have said that makes sense to me, like I think I'm actually kind of with you in terms of I don't understand what the goals of this thing are.
They don't either.
If we take it that the nuclear stuff and degrading the military, that's fine. But then why are you killing their leaders? That's the bit I don't understand.
Well, interestingly, they're not killing their leaders, right? They killed Khamenei, but the Israelis are doing much of the killing. They've killed the intelligence minister. They killed Ali Larijani. Now, let's just deal with what Israel wants, because what Israel wants is pretty clear to anyone watching. They want an unstable, weakened Iran that doesn't pose a threat to them. They don't care if it's a democracy. They don't care if it's a dictatorship. They don't care if it's civil war. They just want Iran off the table, right? And therefore, they're killing people who might do a deal with Trump. They've done this before. Last year in the 12-day war, they tried to kill a guy called Ali Shamkhani, who survived. Then they killed him now. He was a negotiator who Trump had been praising and reposting on social media. They killed him because they don't want Trump to do a deal with this guy.
Why not?
Because they don't want to negotiate a solution to this conflict. They want to keep going, the Israelis, until they wipe out everything they want to.
Yeah, they want to degrade Iran.
They don't want Donald Trump to do one of his deals. That's the worst thing they could have done. They didn't want the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that Obama signed, that resolved the nuclear program for at least 15 years. They were dead against that deal.
But so was Trump himself.
Yes, and Trump pulled out of that deal. And then what happened? Enrichment went up. Then Biden came back in, said, let's try and go back into that deal. The Israelis attacked Natanz in 2021. They enriched up to 60%. Then last year, they went to Oman to negotiate. They had a meeting scheduled for Sunday. The Israelis bombed on Friday. This year, they negotiated in Geneva. The Omani foreign minister came to DC and said, a deal's on the table. Apparently, Jonathan Powell from the UK said there was a deal to be done. Guess what happened? The US and Israel bombed the next day. There's a history of Israel in particular, but also the US, bombing every time we're close to a deal. Every time there's a negotiation in place.
And this is why we just come back to the nuclear point, because I agree with you. It's very clear that there's a difference between the interests of the United States and the war goals of the United States and the war goals and interests of Israel. And Israel's war goals and interests are actually very clear. I'm very unclear as to what the US wants.
Well, if it is the nuclear program, I think we're both unclear, but if it is the nuclear program, I don't think they know. But if it is the nuclear program, this is not the way to do it. Negotiations are the way to solve Israel. There is most experts say you cannot bomb away a nuclear program. It's in people's heads. It's scientific expertise. You cannot kill every scientist and academic.
You can destroy the nuclear material.
And then they can years later, they can rebuild facilities and enrich again.
Sure.
And then you're just mowing the lawn, as the Israelis say, go in and bomb every couple of years. But we had a JCPOA. We had a deal that was working. The IAEA said Iran was in compliance with it. Do you know how much enriched uranium they had under the JCPOA? 3.64%. You know how much they have now? 60%. You want to go back to logic. Logic tells me that was a failure to get out of that deal.
I mean, I also don't think there's any huge evidence that negotiations produce nuclear non-proliferation. I just think this is a very...
Come on.
I think it's
the entire history of the post-war era. Channel it at the people who actually are screwing you over, the people who are getting massive tax cuts from Donald Trump, the people who are not paying their taxes, avoiding taxes, stashing their money offshore, the people who are running big tech companies and screwing over your kids with ridiculous algorithms and nonsense. Channel the anger that way, and I think you'll win.
Look, it's a good point, but also as well, we have to admit that there have been fundamental failings on the left. For instance, the border, having an open border.
There's no open border, Francis. Where's the open border?
Well, Trump has closed it, but before there was an open border.
It wasn't. What's your definition of an open border?
Well, you look...
Millions of illegals coming in.
That doesn't mean it's open. That just means they managed to come in illegally. That just means the border wasn't as secure as you wanted it to be.
Hold on a second.
Open border means I could just walk into America. Nobody could do that.
Well, hold on. If millions of people are able to walk into my house and I say, I've got an open door policy to my house, you go, that's not an open door policy. It just means people got in. I mean, come on.
No, I'm being very serious. If you want to use your house analogy, if you opened your house door and said, everyone come in, no, I'm not going to stop you, then fine, that is an open door policy. If people come into your house in the window in the middle of the night while you're calling the police...
That you left open.
Well, did they leave open?
Well, clearly, because the moment Donald Trump was elected, he closed the window.
Well, he closed it completely, which is ridiculous because now you can't even claim asylum, which is a legal right. Joe Biden actually deported more people than Trump did in his first term. He actually detained and deported.
We're not talking about deportations. Hold on, let's just focus on the open...
Yes.
Mehdi, we're having a great discussion and we're really...
Sorry, you triggered me with open border.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Yes.
But actually, I think we should talk about the issue,
Go on.
and we don't get triggered about it.
Go on. The people who invented suicide bombings were not Muslim. The Tamil Tigers perfected it as a mass weapon, right? That was people who believed they were under occupation by Sinhalese, right? So this is, and Robert Pape, who is an expert on suicide terrorism, has talked about this. There's a clear link between foreign occupations and foreign wars and suicide terrorism, in particular suicide terrorism. But look, is there a problem where certain Muslim groups are exploiting political conflicts? Yes, I spent 20 years opposing jihadists and Islamists and pointing out that there is no justification in Islam for this kind of violence. But, you know, explaining something is not the same as justifying it. I don't justify what they do. I think it's reprehensible. But I understand how they work and the mindsets and how they, you know, and this guy in Michigan is an example of that. I don't agree with what he did. He's probably mentally unbalanced. But, you know, people say, well, what would you do if you lost your family? Well, I wouldn't go attack a synagogue. But that's people act in an unhinged way after tragedies happen in their lives. That's not to justify it. Is it going to get worse? I hope not, but, you know, again, violence begets violence. We've seen that in Palestine. We've seen that with Hamas, right? Who knows what's going to come out of
But isn't that
Gaza?
the exact logic that justifies America bombing the shit out of Afghanistan after 9/11?
It doesn't justify it, but it explains it.
Right.
It does. I mean, so if you asked me, why did America bomb Afghanistan? I wouldn't come up with I wouldn't say it's for the Bible or Christianity. I would say they did it because they got attacked and they wanted to attack back and make a show of force and do whatever they want to do. Doesn't mean I justify it. I didn't agree with the war in Afghanistan, but I understand it. What we refuse to do with our opponents and our enemies, especially the Muslim ones, is try and understand the mindset. We don't try and understand why Iran's doing what it's doing, why Hamas is doing what it's doing, why Hezbollah is doing. You don't have to agree with it, but they're not all crazy people. They actually have their own strategy. And but some people suggest, oh, they're all just messianic people. You did say, Constantine, so I'm going to bring this up because I watched you on Rogan. You did say on Rogan, oh, well, my Iranian guests tell me there's a 12-ish Shia Islam and they're messianic and they want to bring about the end of the world. That's not true. I'm a Shia Muslim. I'm telling you, Shia Muslim is not messianic. I mean, it is messianic in that we expect a Messiah to come just like Christians, a Mehdi. But there's no evidence that Shias in Iran are trying to bring about the end of the world and that's why they want nuclear weapons. So that kind of thinking is not helpful.
I was quoting specific people.
Yeah, and they're wrong, I'm telling you.
Well, they're wrong. I'm only quoting them. And I think I made it clear that some people say that. I'm not, I mean, I think we had this conversation with someone else the other day. I'm not convinced of this idea that they want nuclear weapons and the first nuclear weapon they get, they're going to drop it on Tel Aviv. Insane. I'm not convinced about that. I think there are some people...
By the way, Israel has nukes. Can I just remind, we haven't said that in this whole conversation. Israel illegally has nukes.
You keep throwing stuff in that's not
No, but it's relevant to the conversation. It is relevant. Come on, we spent an hour, half of the talk about Iran's nuclear program. Mehdi, I forgot to point out to the viewers, Mehdi, Israel has nukes.
Mehdi, when we had Yossi Cohen, who was the former head of Mossad, I literally made a joke which exposed the fact that Israel has nukes. Of course, Israel, everyone knows Israel has nukes. No one denies it here, right? But what we've done here is we've derailed the conversation we're actually having.
Let me start with something that almost nobody covering this conversation is saying out loud. Mehdi Hasan sat down with two hosts who presented themselves as reasonable centrists, open-minded, fair, willing to explore all sides. And what the transcript actually shows is that every single time the conversation got to a place where the facts were uncomfortable for the Western establishment narrative, one of the hosts pivoted, changed the subject, retreated into, well, I am just asking questions. That is not centrism. That is the establishment position wearing a casual outfit. And Hasan, calmly, methodically, without raising his voice, exposed it every single time. That matters for everyone watching this channel, because the reasonable centrist frame is one of the most effective tools for neutralizing progressive arguments. It sounds fair. It sounds balanced. But what it actually does is treat the progressive position as the extreme that needs to justify itself, while treating the establishment position as the neutral starting point that requires no justification at all. Hasan did not accept that frame for a single second. And that is the first lesson this conversation teaches. Now let's get into the substance, because there is a lot of it, and it all connects. The Israel lobby conversation, and why it matters that Hasan made them say it out loud. One of the hosts opened with the classic deflection. China spends money influencing American foreign policy. Qatar does. Lots of countries do. So what makes Israel different? On the surface, that sounds like a reasonable question. It is not a reasonable question. It is a framing device, designed to make the documented, undeniable, historically verified, outsized influence of the pro-Israel lobby on American politics sound like just another example of normal geopolitical influence. Hasan dismantled it immediately. He made them acknowledge what they already knew, that no American senator has ever said, "I came into politics to defend Belgium." That Ted Cruz told Tucker Carlson on camera, he came into politics to defend Israel. That when you poll Democratic voters on Gaza, 8% support what Israel is doing. 8%. When you look at Democratic members of Congress, the vast majority support it. That inversion, where elected representatives are almost perfectly reversed from the people they represent, is not explained by sincere belief. It is explained by money, by primary threats, by career consequences, by the very real fear of being targeted and destroyed politically for stepping out of line. I think about the working-class progressive voters who turned out and watched their representatives vote for military aid packages while telling them there was no money for student debt relief, no money for universal health care, no money for housing. The same representatives who say they share their constituents' values and then go to Washington and vote in direct opposition to what those constituents believe. That is not a mystery. That is exactly what Hasan described. And it happens every single cycle while the media calls it governance, the Iran nuclear timeline, because this part should make every American furious. Hasan laid out the nuclear deal timeline with a precision that left no room for spin. And I need everyone watching this channel to have these numbers locked in. Under the Iran nuclear deal, the agreement the international nuclear watchdog confirmed Iran was complying with, Iran had 3.67% enriched uranium, not anywhere near weapons grade. Iran was in compliance. The inspectors confirmed it. The deal was working. Trump pulled out of that deal in 2018. Not because Iran violated it, because Israel did not want it, and because dismantling the previous administration's legacy was politically useful. After the pullout, enrichment went up. Then the next administration came in and said, "Let us try to return to the deal." Israel attacked the Iranian nuclear facility in 2021. Enrichment jumped to 60%. Then negotiations in Geneva. The foreign minister of Oman came to Washington and said a deal was on the table. The next day, bombed. This year, negotiations again. Bombed again. There is a documented pattern of military action timed specifically to destroy diplomatic progress on Iran. It is not a theory. It is a timeline. And it raises a question the hosts on this show definitely did not want to answer. If the goal of this war is to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, why does military action consistently happen at the exact moment a negotiated solution is within reach? Hasan answered that directly. Because the goal is not to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. The goal is a permanently weakened and destabilized Iran that cannot function as a regional power. And the United States has allowed itself to be dragged into pursuing that goal, at the expense of American interests, American lives, and American economic stability. That is not a controversial opinion. That is what the documentary record shows. And here is the part that should hit working Americans the hardest. A senior foreign policy official who ran war games for the United States government on what would happen if America attacked Iran said publicly that the worst-case scenario from those war games is exactly what is happening right now. The strait closed. The Gulf economies under pressure. Oil prices surging past $100 a barrel. Trump came out and said, "We did not know they would do this. We did not know they would close the strait. Hasan called it what it is: incompetence of the highest order. This was the predicted outcome. They chose to do it anyway. Now let us talk about who pays for that choice, because it is not the people who made it. $200 billion. That is what has been requested for this war. $200 billion. You could give free community college to every American in this country with that money. You could cancel a significant chunk of outstanding student loan debt. You could fund a serious national housing initiative that would begin to address the affordability crisis crushing working-class families in every city in this country. You could rebuild the public health infrastructure that exposed itself as catastrophically underfunded not long ago. Any one of those things that would materially transform the lives of ordinary Americans, could be done with a fraction of what is being spent on a war the American public never voted for. But the same politicians who found that money overnight will tell you there is nothing left for your health care, your housing, your kids' schools. And the media that covers those politicians will call it fiscal responsibility. Mehdi Hasan has been pointing at this contradiction for years. This conversation is one of the clearest examples of him doing it with the full receipts in front of him. The Democratic Party section, and why Hasan is right in a way that should make progressive voters angry instead of hopeless. The hosts asked about the state of the Democratic Party, whether there are candidates or ideas worth paying attention to. And Hasan gave an answer that deserves more attention than it got. He said the problem is not that the progressive argument does not work. Zoran Mamdani just proved it works. He ran on economic populism, did not shy away from being against immigration enforcement, overreach, took on the establishment in New York, and won, including voters who had previously voted for Trump. The argument works when someone is willing to make it without apology and without consultant-approved softening. The problem is that the leadership of the Democratic Party is not those people, and has no intention of becoming those people. They are institutionally committed to a version of centrism that has lost repeatedly and continues to lose, because it is not actually centrist. It is corporate. It serves donor interests. It talks to working people in the language of policy papers, and then wonders why working people do not feel seen. Hasan said something that I think is the most important political observation in this entire conversation. The number one criticism American voters have of the Democratic Party is not that they are too extreme. It is that they are weak. They look weak. They act weak. Anytime something happens, they either roll over or write a strongly worded letter. And weakness, especially in a political moment defined by economic anxiety, foreign war, and institutional distrust, is not a neutral quality. It is disqualifying. People who are frightened and angry do not vote for weakness. They vote for strength, even when that strength is fake, even when that strength is the manufactured confidence of a con man who hands tax cuts to billionaires while pretending to fight for the working class. The Democrats have the argument. They have the issues. They have the polling on their side on health care, on housing, on taxing the wealthy, on ending foreign wars. What they do not have, what they have systematically refused to develop, is the willingness to fight. Republicans figured out how to channel anger decades ago. They just aimed it at the wrong people. The Democrats have been so terrified of being called divisive that they forgot how to aim it at all. Hasan said it plainly. Channel the anger at the people who are actually screwing you over, the ones getting massive tax cuts, the ones stashing money offshore, the ones running big tech platforms and destroying your kids with toxic algorithms. That is where the anger belongs. And that is the message that wins. And finally, the immigration point. Because Hasan made an argument here that almost never gets airtime and needs to be repeated everywhere. When the host brought up immigration as a democratic failure, Hasan did something most commentators are too cautious to do. He asked, "Open border compared to what? Compared to whom?" He pointed out that countries in the developing world absorb the vast majority of the world's refugees. The Western nations that helped create the crises driving displacement through the Iraq War, the Libya intervention, the Afghanistan occupation, those countries receive a fraction of the resulting refugee flows. And then treat that fraction as an existential civilizational threat. And then he made the point that should be on a billboard outside every anti-immigration campaign office in the world. Right-wing anti-immigration politicians in the United Kingdom came out in support of the Iran war, saying they stand with the Persian people. The second or third highest nationality on the small boats crossing the English Channel are Iranians. Iranians fleeing the very regime that Western governments just bombed. The same people who say they support Iran are the people turning Iranians away at the border. You genuinely cannot make that irony up, and it never gets covered. Here is the bottom line. This conversation is what progressive media should sound like every single day. Not timid, not balanced for the sake of appearing fair, not willing to let bad faith framing go unchallenged, armed with facts, with timelines, with the specific receipts that turn a talking point into an indictment. Mehdi Hasan walked into that studio and did what Miller's mandate exists to do in this space. Name it, prove it, make them respond to the evidence instead of the narrative, and do it without apology. My father used to say, "The most dangerous person in any room is the one who did the homework." This channel exists because too many people in power are counting on the rest of us not doing ours. We are doing ours. If this is the analysis you have been looking for, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Miller's Mandate if you are not already part of this. And drop in the comments what landed hardest for you today. Because this conversation is bigger than any one channel. And I want to know what you are thinking. I am Silas Miller. The mandate does not stop here.